Every night, my dad was the one who put me to bed. He would help me brush my teeth, tuck me into my warm, cozy bed, and then tell me a story. It was always the same one, the story of Bosco and Billy. My room was filled with books since my mom used to read to me, but Dad never used any of those books. He always told me that same story. I thought it might have come from a book, but maybe Dad had told it so many times that he didn't need to read it anymore. Or maybe it was a story he'd been told as a child. I always loved the story of Bosco and Billy, and it often helped me drift off to sleep. By the end of the tale, I was usually almost asleep. Over time, I learned the story by heart and sometimes recited it with my dad. I think because I heard it every night, it stuck with me, and even now I still remember every word. Here's how the story goes. Billy the bear was an ordinary bear, living an ordinary life, but he had a small friend, Bosco, who often caused some strife. Most of the time, Bosco behaved, but sometimes he'd misbehave. Billy tried to keep him in check, but Bosco would still be brave. Like that one time, Bosco was hungry and decided to steal some food. Billy tried to stop him, but Bosco ignored him, acting rude. Bosco took the food to his secret spot, an oak tree deep in the woods. There, he hid it inside, and that's where he kept his goods. Billy never found the stolen food. It still remains there to this day. Bosco hopes no one ever finds it. He prays it stays that way. Billy's kind, and Bosco's a little silly, and that's the story of Bosco and Billy. At first glance, the story seemed innocent, a cute tale about two bears. But after what happened recently, I realized it was far darker than I ever thought. A few years ago, my dad passed away, and it hit all of us hard, especially my mom. She became more reclusive, and I didn't see her much because she withdrew from others. I spent years trying to reconnect with her, and slowly, over time, I managed to. Things weren't the same, but she started inviting me over for coffee once a week. During these visits, we'd sit in the kitchen, talking about the past. My childhood, my school days, all the good times we shared. The one thing we didn't talk about, though, was my dad. I think the pain was still too fresh for her. One day, though, I decided to mention my dad, thinking it might help her to talk about him. I asked her if she remembered the story Dad used to tell me every night, the story of Billy and Bosco. She looked up from her coffee, confused. Maybe it was because it was the first time his name had come up in years, or maybe she didn't know what I was talking about. "No, I don't remember that story," she said. "You had so many books. I can't remember all of them." I was surprised. Dad told me that story every night, so I thought she'd remember it. I explained that it wasn't a book, but a story Dad recited by heart, not reading from a page because he knew it so well. "I thought your dad read you a different book every night," she said, sounding puzzled. "That's what he always told me, anyway." This was odd because I knew for a fact he never read me any of my books. I would have thought my own mother would have known that. "What was the story about?" she asked. "It was about two bears, Billy and Bosco." Just as I was about to continue, she interrupted me, sounding serious. "Did you just say the bear was named Bosco?" she asked. "Yeah, that's right. His name was Bosco," I replied. "That's strange," she said, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Your dad used to tell me about a friend he had named Bosco. He said Bosco got him into a lot of trouble when he was younger. I never met him, though. Your dad always said it was a good thing. He told me he saw him once or twice after we met, and then he said he was done with him. He said he'd finally gotten rid of Bosco. I always wondered who he was. I never saw any pictures of him or any proof he even existed. Now that I think about it, it's strange that he'd tell you a story with a character named Bosco." Mom stopped, lost in thought. I didn't know how to respond. Then she looked at me and asked, "Can you tell me the whole story again?" I recited it for her. She listened intently, her expression unchanged. After I finished, she asked, "An oak tree? Are you sure Bosco hid the food in an old oak tree in the woods?" "Yeah, definitely." "Why?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "It's just that," she said. "When your dad and I went on our first date, he took me to an old oak tree in Shelton Woods, just a 10-minute drive from here. He told me it was lucky that Bosco didn't interrupt our date." She stared at the wall, lost in thought. "I think it's time for you to go now," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. I got up, gave her a quick hug, which she didn't seem to notice, grabbed my things and left. I got into my car and began the drive home. But as I drove, thoughts of the oak tree and Bosco kept creeping into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I don't know what compelled me, but I had to go to the Shelton Woods and find that oak tree. I turned my car around and headed there. 15 minutes later, I found myself standing at the edge of the woods. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. I wasn't sure where the oak tree was, but I had to find it. After about 10 minutes of walking, I saw it. A massive oak tree stood in front of me, its branches reaching high into the sky. I walked toward it, unease growing in my chest. Something about the place felt wrong. Felt like something terrible had happened here. I looked down at the base of the tree, where the dirt seemed different from the rest of the forest floor. For reasons I still don't understand, I knelt down and started digging. The police say that if I hadn't dug, they might never have found what they did. For bodies, all young women around 24 years old. They'd been dead for over 30 years. There was no doubt. It was clear they had been murdered and buried under that tree. DNA testing confirmed it. My father was responsible for the killings. Somehow, he had kept it all hidden for so many years. He never told anyone. The only clues he left were in my bedtime story, which I think was his way of confessing. Now, the only thing I don't know is, who was Bosco? Maybe my father and Bosco were the same person. Maybe he really did have a friend named Bosco. I don't think we'll ever know. And honestly, I don't think I want to know.